Hello, my name is Kelly Whitfield and I would like to talk to you today about the shoulder in on the circle. I'd like to cover what this movement is, why you would do it, how you train it to the horse, and how you ride it. But first, to set the scene, I maintain a Facebook page called École de Légèreté Perth. My apologies to French people everywhere for my Australian accent murdering a French phrase that means School of Lightness. This is a system of teaching created by Monsieur Philippe Carl. On the Facebook page, I have written many articles trying to explain clearly and simply some of the concepts of the École de Légèreté. I write posts that set out some of the basic ideas of the school, especially since they're a bit different to a more mainstream dressage approach. Usually, people like the pictures of the horses, but sometimes they find some of the basic ideas of the school confronting and write comments that I'm wrong in what I'm saying. Surprisingly, a topic which always gets negative comments is when I have written about an exercise that we call shoulder in on the circle. I've had people comment that this exercise is just wrong. When I ask them why they say that, it's clear that they think that shoulder in should always be performed in a straight line and on 3 tracks. In one of my articles about shoulder in on the circle, I said that it puts the horse more onto the inside shoulder. And then I had 2 people on my page writing snide comments like, "Look, these people put their horses on the forehand with their shoulder in," as if they thought this was hilariously funny. From the comments I received, it was clear that most people don't do the exercise that we call shoulder in on the circle. They only do shoulder in, and they believe that there is only one way to do it. What is a normal shoulder in? That is, the shoulder in on a straight line that most people are familiar with. So, what does this webpage say? What is the shoulder in and why is it useful? Shoulder in is a movement performed on 3 tracks in which the horse's shoulder is brought to the inside while the hind end stays on the wall. In a correct shoulder in, the inside hind leg and outside foreleg step on the same track. The outside hind leg remains on its own track closer to the wall, and the inside foreleg also remains on its own track. It can be ridden in walk, trot, and canter. Performed correctly, the shoulder in helps to straighten and supple your horse, as well as develop the ability to collect and carry more weight on the hocks and hind end. This helps to develop expression in the paces and also lightens the forehand, which is valuable in all disciplines. Riding the shoulder in is also very useful for riders to learn how to isolate control of the forehand from the hind end without losing the shoulders of the horse. Shoulder control in turn makes your horse far more pleasant to ride and helps him to turn and change direction in an organised and balanced way. That sounds good. And look, here's a picture. The horse does seem to be on the 3 tracks that the article talks about. Is it just me, or is that noseband very tight? I'm not saying that anything on that web page is wrong. They describe a shoulder in, which is what you would be judged on in any dressage test. By riding it on 3 tracks, you will undoubtedly show the accuracy and control that the judge is looking for. It's a wonderful exercise. But riding a shoulder in like this is the final result, the proof of your training. If this is the only variety of shoulder in that you have in your toolkit, you will find it's not the best tool for a young horse, a horse with special problems, or just a horse that's quite crooked on one side. Other varieties of shoulder in will be more helpful here, even if you would get a 0 for them if you did them in a dressage test. Shoulder in on the circle is one of those varieties. What is the shoulder in on the circle? The horse does a circle with an inside bend where the quarters move around the forehand so that the front legs are on a smaller circle while the back legs are on a larger one. Firstly, let's give you an idea of what the shoulder in on the circle looks like. Notice that the crossing motion of the inside hind means that that leg must take a very big step. And now I'll demonstrate a circle both ways. Note that I'm not kicking or pushing Sparkle. She understands my aids and responds to them quickly. Can you see that this is a horse that will be able to help me out if I want to do something like open a gate or perhaps manoeuvre between trees without getting my legs squashed? So that's basically what the exercise looks like. Now you might be saying to yourself, that doesn't look like shoulder in. Why do you call it shoulder in? In our school, we find it very useful to think of there being two types of lateral movements, those that are in the principle of shoulder in and those that are in the principle of half pass. The principle of shoulder in is that the horse has a bend and moves away from that bend. Inside this category, you have all of the varieties of shoulder in on a straight line, counter shoulder in on the circle. And within those, you can do the shoulder in many different ways, with more bend or less, with more angle or less, on a small circle or a large one, on a diagonal line, whatever you feel is most needed to supple the horse. This is a picture which I hope will illustrate what I mean. It's Sparkle in a moment of being asked for a shoulder in on the circle on a very small circle. This means that she has a lot of bend to the inside and deep crossing of the inside hind. Can you see that although she is bent to the inside, the direction of travel of her hindquarters will be to the outside? This is the principle of shoulder in. Here's a picture of Sparkle doing a standard shoulder in on 3 tracks, as is required for dressage tests. You can see that she is bent as if to turn in on the track, but is continuing on in a straight line, meeting the definition of a lateral movement according to the principle of shoulder in, the direction of the bend and the direction of travel being different to each other. So you see, the reason that we call it a shoulder in on the circle is that we see the underlying mechanics of the movement as being fundamentally similar to the movement on a straight line. Plus, this picture shows that a horse that can perform the rather more extreme bend and crossing of a shoulder in on the circle can easily perform the more modest bend and crossing required for a 3-track shoulder in on the straight line. Just for completeness, the other type of lateral movement is in the principle of half pass. This is where the horse has a bend and moves towards the direction of the bend. Movements that show this principle are travers, renvers, half pass and pirouette. Here is Sparkle demonstrating a half pass. She is bent towards the track and moving towards the track. But anyway, back to the shoulder in on the circle. You now know what it looks like and why we call it what we do. But if you can't do it in a dressage test, why would you bother with it? Firstly, it is a very, very useful exercise for first teaching a horse the meaning of the isolated use of the inside leg. Once your horse understands that a faint pressure from the rider's inside leg means to move the hindquarters away, the horse will be much more steerable, more controllable. You'll be able to do really useful things like swing the horse's hind end away from another horse or avoid a pothole. With a little practice, you will be able to do all of the varieties of shoulder in. So of course, this is a very nice bit of training for a good riding horse to have, no matter what discipline of riding you're interested in. That's one very handy bit of useful training that the shoulder in on the circle will give to any horse. But more than that, shoulder in on the circle can be a powerful tool which helps to fix specific problems. Let's go through the special problems that the shoulder in on the circle can help with. Panicking. A horse that is tense and panicking very often takes short, disordered steps and has its neck high and braced. Here's a nice picture of my early days with Sparkle. She really can get herself rather worked up. When she's in a flighty and emotional state, she shows her half-Arab side by taking short, hot, mincing steps with her head in the air, lurching this way and that. It's not much fun for either of us. Her mood becomes chaotic and jerky, and this is reflected in her movements. I know there have been times where she has wound herself up into such a state that I didn't feel safe on her back, so I got off. When your horse is starting to get into this panic mode, the shouldering on the circle can be very useful in changing their physical state and restoring order and calmness. It's quite a funny thing, and I wouldn't even believe it if I hadn't used the shouldering on the circle many times to successfully calm down my hot mare. This movement actually promotes a stretching reflex over the horse's top line. I just wanted to show you the stretching reflex in action. Sparkle isn't panicking today, but I'm going to ask her to do some shouldering on the circle steps, and then you'll see how she wants to stretch afterwards. First, I ask for the steps, and then I release her and ask her to go out on a bigger circle, then trot. See how she wants to stretch? When she takes the trot, it's with long, loose strides. This is a tool I use very often when lunging to help her decontract and be more calm. What causes this stretching reflex? When the horse is really bracing above the bit, like Sparkle was in that picture, both sides of the neck are straight and short. In comparison, in the shouldering on the circle, the horse's neck takes a big curve. The muscles on one side of the neck are long, and on the other side, they're short. Not only is this incompatible with a big upwards brace during the exercise, I think that after, the horse wants to stretch the side of the neck that was short. You also make the inside hind take big, long steps right under the horse's body. This is incompatible with the short steps which are a part of the panic mode. When the exercise has helped to restore calmness and stretch, when you let the horse move on again on a straight line, you nearly always find that they then want to stretch even more. The big stretch after a shouldering on the circle seems quite a reliable reflex. So, the shouldering on the circle can be very helpful for a horse that is panicking. What other problems can it help with? Refusing to turn. I don't know about you, but when I was young, I imagined that steering the horse was all about using the reins to point the horse's nose in the direction you wanted to go. The horse goes where the nose goes, right? Well, when I got my own horse, I soon found out that she wasn't always convinced about my silly ideas about where we should go. She could bend her neck freely in the direction I indicated, but run with great agility in the opposite direction. This photo here clearly shows this. If the horse followed its nose, it would go over the jump, but in actual fact it is running out to the side. This illustrates an important point about how to control the horse's direction. It isn't the nose or even the hindquarters that dictate where the horse goes, it's the shoulders. One of the interesting features of shouldering on the circle is that it puts proportionally more of the horse's weight on the inside shoulder. This is because the whole horse is organising itself to move around this quadrant. The inside foreleg takes the shortest steps and bears the most weight, while the other legs take steps that rotate around it. It's like a child on a bicycle putting more weight on the front tyre in order to swing the rear tyre around. One of the really telltale signs that the horse doesn't want to go where we are indicating is they might let their head turn to the direction we want to go, so they have an inside bend, but their weight is on the opposite shoulder and the rider feels that the outside rein has no turning power at all. The horse might even run powerfully to the outside. When this happens, the rider can use the shouldering on the circle to re-establish shoulder control. I'll talk a bit more about the rider's aids later, but for now it's enough to understand that the combined effect of the neck bend, the rider's weight and a forward impulse of the hindquarters mean that the horse can be put solidly onto the foreleg of choice and be more or less obliged to turn around that as their inside foreleg. The exercise can be repeated until the horse correctly takes up the shoulder alignment that the rider has indicated, at which point the horse will once again respond correctly to the outside rein, again as a turning aid. I don't have any video of this, so it might help illustrate this point if I tell you of an experience I had in the early days of training Sparkle. Here she is when I first saw her. She was barely halter broken. I really wanted to do all of her training myself. I took her home and over many months did lots of lunging and in-hand work to prepare her for being a ridden horse. Here's a picture of me proudly in the saddle in the first weeks of riding her. I was very happy because she steered and stopped, and we could do walk, trot and canter in the arena. Wonderful. The first problems happened sometime after this picture and the next. The arena had a dense grouping of trees at the far end, away from the gate. You can see the trees in the background of this photo. The trees had never caused a problem during the lovely weather that I'd had in the first weeks of breaking Sparkle in. But one day I was riding her and for the first time it was very windy. The wind roared through the trees, also making them shake and sway. Sparkle started showing signs of concern at these goings-on. On the left rein, at first I could convince her to go large around the arena, getting close to the trees. But then the first signs of trouble crept in. The next circuit of the arena, at about the 3/4 mark, she started to turn her head to the right to look at the trees and wobbled off the track, cutting the corner a lot. I tried to use the right rein to steer her back to the fence, but without much luck, and she kept lots of space between her and the frightening trees. I made a mental note to ride her closer to the trees the next time around, but things escalated quickly. On the next circuit around, she started to prop and wobble off the fence only halfway to the trees. My attempts to steer her back to the fence with the right rein were completely unsuccessful. She bent her neck that way, but barged through her left shoulder to cut the corner. Then I think she decided that she needed to take affirmative action to get away from the trees. Keeping her head bent to the right, she ran sideways like a crab to the left, making a very direct line to the arena gate. I was helpless to stop her and was being carted away. Fortunately, just before we left the arena entirely, I remembered the shouldering on the circle. Keeping the right bend that she was offering, I weighted her inside shoulder and used my inside leg and whip taps to swing her hindquarters around to the left. It wasn't very elegant, but she did a shoulder in on a small circle, which halted her headlong surge out of the arena. I did several circles in shoulder in front of the gate until order was restored. By putting her weight onto her inside foreleg instead of the outside, I stopped her ability to run away to the outside. I discovered that the shouldering on the circle was very effective at preventing her from being able to run out through one shoulder. Touch wood, she's never been able to run away with me again. As I continued to ride on that windy day, I discovered that my ability to do a shouldering on the circle in either direction meant that I could put her weight on whatever shoulder I liked, and this resulted in the steering being reinstated. It was like she'd had a wheel alignment. After which I was able to ride as close to the scary trees as I liked. Then, of course, I had to manage her anxiety about the trees being very dangerous. That took a longer time, but actually it was very much helped by her going near them and finding out that nothing bad happened. Okay, so the shouldering on the circle helps when a horse is refusing to turn. What other problems does this exercise help with? Pacing. Another special problem that a horse can have is pacing in the walk. Unless you have some sort of gaited horse, a walk should have a clear 4-beat rhythm and if anything have a pronounced diagonal moment. If the legs on one side tend to move together, you are losing the nature of the walk. I saw this very nice example on YouTube on a site called Dressage Hub. Here the horse is marching along and looks like he's going somewhere. Here is the same horse showing a lateral walk. You can see that the legs on one side are moving virtually together, then the same with the legs on the other side. What is it that causes a horse to pace? Here I've recorded a sequence in slow motion of Sparkle walking on a long rein. The walk sequence is left hind, left fore, right hind, right fore. Left hind, left fore, right hind, right fore. Okay, now I want to draw your attention to a few things. Back up, Sparkle, there's a good girl. Here, if you look at the left pair of legs in this moment, they are close together. This means that the horse's left side is shorter, but at the same time, the right pair of legs are far apart. The sequence of walk alternates with a simultaneous closing on one side while the other side opens, then vice versa. Look once more at how the legs alternate in closing and opening. It makes sense that this opening-closing sequence is lost in the horse that paces. But why? Or, to put it another way, in the horse that is moving in a healthy walk, what is it that they need to be able to do? Now you're going to have to use your imagination a bit. Here is a still shot of a moment where the left pair of legs are close together and the right legs are far apart. Underneath it is a drawing which represents a bird's eye view of the same moment. The drawing shows what the spine has to do to accommodate the simultaneous shortening of one side and lengthening of the other. It has to curve a bit, the same way that a fish's spine curves when it swims. The drawing exaggerates this for the purposes of making it clearer. And here is the same representation when the right pair of legs are close together and the left legs far apart. When one pair of legs is far apart, the foreleg is stretching out in front of the horse's body, while the hind leg has pushed far away from the horse's body. Yet at the same moment, the other side of the body is scrunched together. It is a complex movement and the spine must bend to accommodate it. There's a very easy experiment to demonstrate how the spine must mobilise. Get down on all fours and crawl with the same walking pattern as the horse. Your spine will curve side to side like a fish. In fact, it's a complex three-dimensional movement where the spine also goes up and down, particularly to accommodate the alternating reach and push of the hind legs. I should say here that these drawings are based on a sequence of drawings from Monsieur Carle's Twisted Truths of Modern Dressage. Now that we've talked about how the spine of the horse must move in a good walk, let's have another look at the horse from the Dressage Hub YouTube channel. Here is his good walk again. Of course, from this angle you can't see his spine bending side to side like a fish, but look at how his pairs of legs close on one side while opening on the other. Try to imagine how this simultaneous opening and closing is like the spine of the fish, curving left and right as it swims. His back is mobile in other directions too. See how his rump goes up and down a lot to accommodate the big steps of his hind legs. Also, his head moves up and down freely. Now let's see him pace again. We can see the lack of closing and opening in his sides. This fish isn't swimming anywhere. Look at how little movement there is in his rump, and his neck is very still too. The bracing in his spine has reduced his movement greatly. Not only that, look at how reduced in size the steps of his hind legs are. How do we fix this? What we need is a movement that can dramatically increase the closing motion on one side of the horse while at the same time lengthening the other side. It would also help if this movement creates really big steps behind. Here's one I prepared earlier. The shoulder in on the circle creates an increased closing pattern for the inside pair of legs, as we can see here. This is partly because the bend of the horse is on a small circle to the inside, but it's also because the inside hind takes a dramatically longer step underneath the horse. At the same time, the longer path that the outside pair of legs is travelling opens up this side in comparison. The fish-like side-to-side curving of the horse's spine is accentuated. If you have a horse that has a tendency to pace in the walk, as soon as you detect a lateral tendency, use the shoulder in on the circle to restore the alternate opening and closing of the horse's sides. It will stop the pacing immediately, at which point you can go on walking on a straight line. As soon as you feel that the walk is becoming lateral, go back to the shoulder in on the circle. With patience and repetition, the horse can learn how to keep the healthy movement of a correct walk. I've given quite a few examples now of certain problems that the shoulder in on the circle can be very useful for. There's one final special problem that this exercise is very helpful to address. Do you remember I said I got negative comments on my Facebook page? These people put their horses on the forehand with their shoulder in. Because you never want to put your horse on the forehand, right? What about now? I bet this rider would really like her horse to be more on the forehand than he currently is. How must the horse organise his body in order to be able to rear? He needs to share his body weight fairly equally between both hind legs in order to lift his forehand up. This is a movement that takes so much strength that he generally needs to be pretty straight in his body in order to do it. The shoulder in on a circle puts the horse in a balance which is incompatible with rearing. The combined action of the bend to the inside and the hindquarters moving to the outside mean that the hind legs are strongly separated in their action. At the same time, much more weight is brought to the inside shoulder. These create the opposite balance conditions to what the horse needs in order to be able to rear. As much as possible, the rider doesn't fight the horse, but changes his balance. Of course, you want to investigate and eliminate any reasons that the horse might have to rear, such as health problems or badly fitting gear. A rearing horse is very dangerous. Before taking on a horse that you know rears, as a minimum, you would want to make sure that he understands flexions and can do shoulder in on the circle on the ground. You need to look after your safety, and you should frankly reconsider whether to take on the task of retraining such a horse. How do you train the shoulder in on the circle? The horse finds the movement relatively easy because by nature he is already a bit on the forehand. It is clearest for the horse if you teach it to him from the ground first. For an untrained horse, it's often enough if you ask him to turn his head to one side. This makes him unbalanced, so he has to swing his hindquarters across. In this video, I was hoping to turn Sparkle's head and have her demonstrate a stepping away with her hindquarters, but she concluded that I just wanted her to bend her neck, which I thought was rather cute. Actually, let's go back. There's a moment here which is rather instructive. If you look closely, you can see a couple of little moments where, in order not to swing her hindquarters across, she has to put more weight into her outside shoulder. Anyway, to demonstrate how we might teach a young horse, I have the bend and I gesture at her hindquarters. This is enough to start the shoulder in on the circle. The horse has a long spine, and it is a simple fact that bending the front end in will tend to make the back end step out. A 16-hand horse will have a total spine length of over 2 metres. That's a long lever. In its simplest form, you can start this exercise with a young horse just with a halter on, asking him to yield his quarters away from you. It's very useful to have a whip to help indicate that the hindquarters are to move. If the horse is a bit reluctant to move, the whip can be used to deliver little taps to the hindquarters, which is the body part that you want to step across. I'm not talking here about beating the horse. Rather, you do a sequence of electric little taps to inspire action. You do as little as possible to get the result you want. Once the horse understands, you can cue the shoulder in on the circle by holding the whip horizontal, aligned to the circle that you want the horse to take. It's also particularly handy to do this movement in hand, that is, with a bridle on, as I'm demonstrating in this picture. This means that the horse gets to experience the same feel through the bit as he will experience under saddle. You practice the movement on the ground until the horse's response is smooth and reliable. When he's ready, then it's time to try it under saddle. How does the rider ride this movement? Firstly, my apologies for my dodgy artwork and wobbly horse. Hopefully it is somewhat representative of a horse which is going to perform a shoulder in on the circle to the left. You can see there is a smaller arrow at the shoulder to represent the shorter path that it will take, and a longer arrow located near the hindquarters to show that these are on the longer path. As much as possible, we take the elements that the horse already knows from learning the movement on the ground. This includes asking for an inside bend. In fact, the rider rotates their upper body inwards to take on the alignment that they want the horse to take. When done well with a trained horse, a bystander will not be able to see any rein aids being given. The rider and the horse both turn into the movement, looking in the same direction. We know that the horse must weight its inside shoulder to perform the exercise. To help with this, the rider places more weight to the inside. The rider's inside leg is at the girth. In the école de légèreté, we cue the shoulder in with the inside leg at the girth. Some other schools of riding ask for the shoulder in by drawing the inside leg back, but I think our way is a lot simpler because it means that whenever the horse has a bend in his body, such as when he's on a circle, doing a half pass or doing shoulder in, you always have your inside leg on the girth and your outside leg back. If it's logical and simple for you to remember, the horse will find it easier too. With the isolated use of the rider's inside leg, the horse is cued to step the hindquarters outwards. In case the horse needs a little extra encouragement, the whip can be used to tap the hindquarters to encourage them to step away. I should say here that when you are first teaching the movement to a horse under saddle, the horse will understand from ground training that the bend and the whip taps cue the movement. So this is how you first cue the movement under saddle, but you also add the inside leg cue. Your aim is to fade the whip cue as soon as possible and have the horse responding nicely to the inside leg. Congratulations, you now have a horse that understands the isolated use of the inside leg. You always aim for the most minimal aids that will be effective, and even then you aim to diminish your aid's strength so that the whispered aids are a secret between you and your horse. To sum up, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover on this topic. To finish, I'll recap the main points. Putting aside for a second all of the special problems it can be used to fix, for me a key point in favour of the shoulder in on the circle is that it is a very easy way to simply and clearly explain to the horse the isolated use of the rider's inside leg. Being able to ask the horse to swing their hindquarters to one side means that you have a far more manoeuvrable horse. As I've set out in this presentation, certain horses with special problems will really be helped by the shoulder in on the circle. These problems include a tense and panicking horse, the horse that refuses to turn, pacing in the walk, and rearing. I also touched on how you would go about training it to the horse, first on the ground and then under saddle. And I've touched on the rider's aids to cue and support the horse in performing the shoulder in on the circle. Although there are a lot of points in favour of this exercise already, I haven't even touched on how useful it can be to straighten the crooked horse. All lateral movements can be performed with a different emphasis on each rein to help the horse become more ambidextrous, but that's a big topic for another day. A final point about the shoulder in on the circle. Once you have this tool, the horse is responsive to your inside leg, the request for bend, and can follow your weight aid. A horse that is obedient and responsive to the aids like this is so much more manoeuvrable and a pleasure to be around. That's all for now. I hope you found this topic to be of interest. Thanks for listening.